Hi everyone, how are you?
Good morning.
Good morning, good morning.
Hello.
Hello. Hold on one second. We'll get started in just a second. Anybody have any questions before we get started?
I just had a quick question.
Yeah.
So under the decreasing and increasing your touch, there was an assignment for a one-page. Forgot what you had to write it on. But it said it was due Sunday. That wasn't last Sunday, right?
No. It's this Sunday.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Let me make sure that that's correctly said. Let's see right here. So is that right here is due by Sunday, the due date?
Yeah, I think I
Yeah,
just read it wrong.
yeah, no, that's so increasing and decreasing touch is due this Sunday, and
Mhm.
then the skill assignment is the following Sunday. Some people have started to turn them in early, which is totally fine, but it's not due until this starting this Sunday.
Oh, okay. Thank
Yeah,
you.
you're welcome. You're welcome. So anyone else have any more questions? I'm going to share my screen. Let me see here. So this chapter is chapter 6. It's the nonverbal communication chapter. The major thing that is the difference between last week's lecture and this week's discussion. I'm not going to do a full lecture because I'm going to kind of talk through it and then we'll kind of ask some questions about it. But I am going to talk about it to make sure you understand the major difference between verbal and nonverbal communication. So verbal communication was, the linguistic value of words. So for example, if I can look it up into a dictionary, then I know that it's verbal or language. So stuff like that is going to be nonverbal because it has no linguistic value. I'm just going on subjection. I can't, really define it as anything. I'm only going based on what I think that meaning is, or asking the other person and then letting them tell me. So it's a world way beyond definitions. I've got to look at your eye contact. And if you roll your eyes while I'm speaking, I might take it personal and think that, I've said something to upset you, or maybe that you're mad at me, and you may just have a speck in your eye, or you're thinking about an argument you got in with someone before we were talking. And that's the reason that nonverbal communication can be so subjective and confusing, because we can define it based on our own unique experience, instead of actually knowing what the definition might be of what that person is saying. So for this upcoming assignment, I really want you to think about the world of nonverbal communication. I don't want you to really think about words as much as observing what you see happening around you. So for example, when you were doing the functioning and nurturing example, you were kind of looking at nonverbal and verbal, how we communicate with each other, things that we say or don't say, stuff like that. But now, as we're moving into the increasing or decreasing touch, I want you to play the role of kind of watching what happens if you increase your touch physically with other people, or if you decrease your touch physically with other people. What happens for yourself? How do you feel? And what do you notice from the people around you? And I know that, with COVID, we're in a little bit more of a socially distanced world. So some people have fun with this assignment and they look through the different examples of the types of nonverbals, and you'll find those Those start right, let me see, on slide 15. But they look at all these different examples of nonverbal types. And some people will have fun with these, trying to test people, looking at posture and trying to get signals about what the posture of someone means. Or they may look at gestures or eye contact. So what you want to do is look through and understand the different types of nonverbal communication, and then you're going to write your paper about kind of what you've observed and what it felt like. So some people who are very introverted, it might feel awkward to increase your touch because you're not used to, getting in people's space or boundaries. But I want you to challenge yourself because it's going to make it easier to write that paper about that experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. And so, what you should be doing for this chapter is looking at kind of what is nonverbal communication. You should know that we as communicators put more weight on nonverbal communication than other styles of communication. So for example, I believe less what you say than how you say it. So if I say, do you love me? And you go, yeah, I love you a whole lot. Now, I love you a whole lot. If you wrote that to me, I might take that differently than how you just answered that question. And that's because of the nonverbal pausing or the inflection. All those things are going to be what I believe. So I might be, well, wow, that was a really weird way to answer that question. And that is going to be more powerful than just the language that you're using. And so we want to think about the fact that there's a lot of value put on nonverbal communication, and we definitely need to be taking that into consideration when we're communicating with people. So, part of what happens in that example is we could be in a situation where, let's say that we're in a job interview. Sometimes we don't think about our clothing, what we're wearing. Like even right now, I'm wearing a College of the Sequoias t-shirt because I know that I'm speaking to a College of the Sequoias environment. Now, that doesn't mean that you can see the t-shirt, but it's creating for me the nonverbal identity of I'm in my teacher mode. I've got to be, on with explaining what the examples are and making sure that I'm asking if there's questions, and all that stuff is going to be created based on my identity and how I'm actually presenting myself. On top of that, if I am looking at someone and giving direct eye contact to that person, that also might be seen as either a threat, depending on how they read nonverbal communication, or it may be seen as a positive. So if they put a lot of value on direct eye contact, they may look at it from the standpoint of, wow, I trust this person. They're looking at me. They're giving direct eye contact. But if the other person doesn't put that same value, they don't, they feel intimidated by direct eye contact. That could create some intimidation. They may not trust me as a communicator. They may feel that I am being disrespectful because I'm giving direct eye contact. So I want to think about the fact that there's lots of value put on our nonverbal communication while we're communicating with one another. Now, what we also want to know is it sets the tone. So for example, while I'm watching and we're communicating with each other, how you interact with me nonverbally will influence how I begin to interact with you. So for example, if you start to build connection and trust by, giving me body orientation, turning your body attention towards me, your eye contact towards me, I might give you more of that body orientation or eye contact. So it sets the tone of how we communicate with each other. Even my actual tone as I'm communicating with you, if I'm short or I am direct in my language, you might mimic and reciprocate that same type of nonverbal communication through language. Now, the other thing that I want you to focus on in reference to this slide is the differences between verbal and nonverbal. So verbal communication is just one single message. So if I write down on a sheet of paper, I love you, or I say, I love you, Or in some people's example, I might, text it, I love you. All of those examples are kind of verbal because that's language that I'm defining based on, the words that are being used. But if I say I love you and I've texted it to you and then you wait a long time to respond, that's the nonverbal definitions that are going into that type of messaging. It's not just the words and the definition that I'm putting onto the words, it's the nonverbal value that I'm also putting on to that element. Does that make sense? Everybody with me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to think about the fact that there are multiple ways that I could define nonverbal communication, and there is only one single way that I really look at language because it's just kind of can be a definition. Yeah, there may be multiple definitions for a single word, but if I'm using language or I'm looking up that definition, I know what those options are. If I'm just defining it based on nonverbal, it is very ambiguous and unclear. And so I've got to take that into consideration. With verbal messages, it's very discrete. You have a beginning and you have an end. So I don't generally, have a way for you to know what I was thinking about before I say it. And non-verbally, though, you probably can tell that I've been thinking about something before I've said it. And after we're together, I may still think about what I've said or how I said it or what you said in response. And that's the nonverbal engagement in that interaction. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So for example, one time I was watching these two students, and I know this is going to sound kind of stalkerish, but I was watching these students as I was passing by this elementary school, or no, it was a junior high. And it was this couple standing at like the four-way stop. And the guy kind of directed me to keep going. And I drive through the crosswalk and I look back in my rearview mirror and I see that the student is walking across the crosswalk, the guy, and the girl is walking the opposite direction. And so I continue to look in my rearview mirror, and I don't have any verbal messages to go along with what I'm seeing, but I'm creating a story because I'm seeing that as a continuous, moving picture for myself is kind of what it was. And so I start thinking, oh, he's looking back at her as he was walking across the crosswalk. And I thought, oh my God, it's so cute. He's checking on her to make sure she's okay. And then I watch as he looks back and I'm like, oh, he probably feels like he's looking at her, but she's not looking at him. And then I start driving again and I look back in my rearview mirror again. And I notice that now she has turned back to look back at him. And he's not looking at her. So I'm in my car and I'm like, buddy, she's looking at you. Turn around, because I wanted him to know that he wasn't the only one giving that nonverbal connection. She was giving it too. And so what you definitely want to make sure that you're doing is understanding that we never know what a person's doing after we leave each other, but they are sometime continuously communicating with us, even though we may not be directly in that communication moment. And so I got to move to get to my power cord. But the one thing that you want to make sure that you understand is that, even when we're in a fight with someone, we're in a situation where, we leave an argument. And when we leave that argument, we may find ourselves still arguing with that person. Have you ever been in a fight with someone and then after the fight's over, you're still talking about why they're wrong and, what you think about them and, why their argument was so stupid or whatever. And in your mind, you're still in the argument. And that is the continuous nonverbal communication. But the fight is everything that you both were communicating to each other in the moment. Any confusion about that?
No confusion.
Okay, perfect. Good. Well, that means we're clear verbally. And the nonverbal is people doing like this. So thank you very much. So verbal messages are very clear. That means that you can't get any clearer than I love you or I hate you. But what I mean by that, I love you, is very ambiguous. So how I read into that message is the nonverbal element. And, the clarity of language is really just, how clear I can be with the language that I'm using. But how I send that message can also influence a person's, whether or not they really believe I feel the way that I'm saying. So for example, you'll hear some people say, your actions don't match your words. And so that means that your nonverbal communication was sending different messages than what you're actually saying to me. And that's the verbal messages are clear, but don't seem accurate because of the nonverbal elements that are happening. Verbal messages have little impact. So again, we put a lot of weight on the nonverbal. So I am going to believe a lot more what I see you doing than what you tell me. And that's everybody. And that's a really good thing to understand and take in, that you, as well as other people, are putting more value on nonverbal communication than the verbal communication. And you should, I want to make sure that you look at this slide one more time. You should be paying attention to that percentage, because that's one of the questions on the test, the test 2. It'll ask you what's the percentage, and it's a really low percentage is an option, and then this really high percentage is the option. If you look at that number of 65 to 93%, that means that some people only give 7% value to our words. That means it's not even worth us speaking. They're totally looking at our nonverbals to give weight to what we're talking about. So those are things to just be aware of as you're studying and thinking about nonverbal communication. And then the next one is verbal messages are intentional and deliberate. So for example, if I am communicating something and I say something, even if I'm signing it, whatever I say, I've thought about it. I am communicating it. I know what I'm saying, and then I'm done once I stop. But everything that's happening around that language, and as I said before, even signing is a language. And so if I start with I love you, and I start with I and I end with you, that is the intentional, discreet, very clear. But what the other person is doing is watching the timing of when I said it. They may be looking at my facial expressions as I say it. What attention I give after I say that statement. And so that's the reason that I have to think about, sometimes if I'm not thinking about my nonverbals, I may unintentionally or unconsciously send a message. So for example, is there anybody in here who's ever been upset with someone and you gave off a clue that you were upset with the person before you actually said it verbally? Can anybody give me an example? Chantel, can you tell me the example? You're on mute.
Okay, for example, like if I'm angry, I'll walk to the room and I'll just totally close the door and just push everybody out. And I'm sure they get the idea that I'm mad.
Yes.
And I know I'm never.
Yeah. And sometimes you might even, somebody might say, are you upset with me? And you're like, yeah, how'd you know? Because, and you're probably slamming cupboards or something while you're making dinner and you didn't even know, but you're arguing, and in your mind, you're in that moment. But another example might be, someone saying to you, hey, you really like that person, don't you? And you don't even know that you're giving off that signal, and your best friend really knows how to read you. And they're like, well, I saw how you were looking at them. And, I saw how you smiled, or, you were really talkative whenever they showed up. And they are reading those nonverbals that you're not articulating. And you may not have even checked in with yourself to know that you're doing those things. But you are, and that is sending off a nonverbal message. You're like, oh my God, I didn't mean to, don't tell anybody. And you're in that moment because they're reading you really good nonverbally. And so the thing to remember about yourself is that you can say a message, but you are saying a lot more just by the nonverbals that you're sending off to another person. And those are things to be aware of. And then the next part is the characteristics of nonverbal communication. And what I want you to know about the characteristics is that, you know, across cultures, we communicate differently. So for example, you know, as I'm communicating right now, how I say something, like the direct eye contact would be a good example. If I'm raised in a culture that values eye contact and you're raised in a culture that doesn't value it, we could have miscommunication just in this very moment, because you may feel threatened by the fact that I'm looking directly at you and you just kind of want to have some space. Well, and you know, just the opposite might be if you deliver a speech to me and you don't look at the camera continuously because you've been told not to, you know, directly intimidate and look at someone. You know, you don't need to, you know, stare someone down. You just communicate what you want to say, and you start to deliver a speech and I judge you for that. And I say, you know, wow, you need to make more eye contact. That means that our cultural definitions are different. And so the characteristics about nonverbal communication is that we all have definitions, and everything that we do is an existence of a nonverbal definition. Just the sheer fact that I'm here today is a nonverbal message. If I was absent, that would send a message. And so if I'm a 14-year-old on the soccer field and I'm looking for my parents to show up and they don't show up, that may send a nonverbal message to me. Now, I might take it negatively and think, oh, they don't care about me. You know, they don't want to be here, whatever. But in reality, it might be that they're working 3 jobs so I can play on this soccer team, because they can't afford me to do it unless they're doing these jobs. So they definitely care about me enough to do that, but I'm defining their presence or lack thereof as a nonverbal value. And so we really want to be careful that if we're defining something as a nonverbal definition, that we're checking in with people and say, you know, hey, I noticed that you weren't at my game today. What came up? Or, you know, was it not important to you? I'm just checking in because I don't want to define it in the wrong way. Or I noticed when we were communicating, you rolled your eyes. Did I say something to upset you? Is there something else bothering you? It's really smart to check in and kind of give definition to that. And that's because of those values. It's because of the relational definitions that come through with nonverbal communication. And it's because it is so ambiguous and so unclear. So we really want to think about, are we giving the right message as we're communicating? We also want to make sure that we know that there are different functions. So for example, you know, I might say, great job. So I'm giving even more emphasis with the tone that I'm using, with the nonverbal, you know, thumbs up that I'm giving. I can give lots of ways of showing that I want to complement my language through different frameworks. And I can communicate with what I could never say anything, and you might get a sense that I'm upset or happy or you know, depressed, all kinds of different expressions that I could give just through my face and eyes that might give off a certain message to you. And then, as I said before, I want you to read through these types because I want each one of them are explained. There's about 17 that are listed here. I'm not going to go through them all, but these are things that you could pick to observe when you're doing your increasing or decreasing your touch. So if you chose not to focus on touch, but you wanted to focus on another nonverbal element, you could do that. You would just need to tell me what you chose to focus on. So I might focus on, in my own household, if I don't say anything, if I don't communicate at all, who communicates the most other than me? Who's trying to pull me out in the conversation? So non-verbally, if I'm distant, what would the other communicators that live in my household do to fill that void if I'm the one that's usually communicating? Does that make sense? that might be something that I would observe. Any questions about that assignment? Candace, I'm sorry I'm going so fast. I know students are working and doing other things, so I try to get through it, and
You're fine.
it's called speed signing.
Right.
So any questions about the assignment that's due Sunday night? So I really feel like, it's for you to kind of be creative with that assignment, the increasing and decreasing touch. And it does need to be really full, 3 paragraphs or more. You're shooting for 1 page. You're going to upload it to Canvas. And that has to be done by Sunday night at midnight. Then the following week, you have the next skill assignment that's due, and that's just picking through that list, doing one of those skills that are listed there, and then writing about the experience. And those 2 things are due over the next 2 weeks. You can turn them in. The increasing or decreasing touch is due by Sunday night, and then the skill is by the next Sunday night, but you can turn them in early whenever you want. And then the last part of this chapter is just understanding the guidelines for nonverbal communication. The first thing is we need to know that when we are putting definition to nonverbal communication, we need to monitor that. So for example, I have to observe my own nonverbal communication. So if I notice that I'm going fast, or if I notice that I'm, not making good eye contact, or if I notice that I'm stepping away as someone steps into my space, I might want to monitor that and adjust. So I'm not sending the wrong signals. But I also want to be very careful when I'm giving definitions. So for example, I can observe another person, but I want to be careful the definitions that I give to what I observe, because I may be wrong. And it's really smart to think about, well, what I observed, am I really personalizing it and putting my own spin on it? Or is what I'm seeing actually happening? And the only way I'm going to know that is if I check in and I really make sure that what I'm defining as that nonverbal communication is actually correct. And so, for example, if I, think someone's mad at me because of something that they did, I might, seek clarity and say, hey, I just wanted to check in. And I also may be very aware of the nonverbals I'm sending off, because I don't want to send the wrong signal and give someone the wrong impression about who I am or what I'm trying to communicate. So that is the chapter 6 slides. And so you have chapter 5 that we've gone over, which is the verbal communication. You have chapter 6, which is the nonverbal communication. And then next week we'll have the listening chapter. And that chapter will be the last chapter before test 2. So you only have 3 chapters that you need to focus on. And I think the listening chapter is chapter 4. So 4, 5, and 6, if you're reading the textbook, are the ones that you should be looking at. If you're not, no problem. As long as you're studying the PowerPoints that I'm sending out and kind of going over the lectures when we talk about them, you're totally fine. But if you want to read the textbook as well, it's chapters 4, 5, and 6 for test 2. Okay. Okay, I'm going to stop screen share. Any questions? Okay. All right. Well, if there's no questions, you all are free to go. Make sure if you do have questions, don't hesitate to message me. I will post this video with closed caption later on today. So if you want to watch the video again, you can do that just to make sure that you have all the details of what we discussed. And if you have questions about the assignment, make sure that you message me either through text or through Canvas.
Okay.
Okay, cool. Have a
Thank
good
you.
day. Have a good
Awesome.
day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Signer. Thank you, Candace.